So our final speaker is Priya Lakhani. She has so many talents and so much energy. I don't want to even start talking about them, but she is CEO of Century Tech, and she's going to tell us about all sorts of different things. Aren't you, Priya?
Yeah, thank you.
Give us a take-home message. Wrap it all together.
Thank you so much. I have to respond to that point. I actually think that it is so important that we have people that challenge data. I'm a complete and utter data geek. I love data. But what I would say is Claire made a really valid point about how girls think, you know, from the age sort of 7, 9 years old. Actually, there's data to show. You've all been to a park, right? We've all been to parks. Some of us have got kids who've been to the park with the kids. You've got the fireman's pole in the park, right? Or there's the pole that sort of leads down from where the slide is and they can take that pole. So researchers in the US sat around in those parks and started seeing what's the behaviour around the fireman's pole. And some of you may know this. What's really, really fascinating is that parents with boys and girls would say, go on, go and play in the park, go and have fun. The second the girl would go to the fireman's pole, no, 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 sweetheart, don't touch that, it's too dangerous for you. You might fall, you might hurt yourself. The boys, no, 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 go climb up it, jump down it, take the risk. And what's really, really interesting about that data is that we create this bias in our children right from the start, from the age of preschool, that boys can take risks, boys can become inventors, they can be risk-taking, they can become entrepreneurs, and girls go for safety. And I'm actually going to go into a little bit about culture. And when we go into that culture chart that I show you in a moment, it's really interesting to see how people behave. And so there was talk about females potentially taking positions that were more caring. But that's because we train our children to think in that way. Girls, this is safe, caring, this is how you have a sense of purpose. Why is it that most female entrepreneurs run social impact businesses? I'm case in point of one of those. And why is it that actually the majority of male entrepreneurs do not run social impact businesses that change the world? But boys can take risks. And I just wanted to respond to that because actually, if you do want to change the world from tomorrow morning or even from tonight, because that's what this is all about. We all come to conferences. I saw some of you at 1 o'clock in the morning at the Hilton Hotel when I arrived, having a very nice time. So obviously a very good conference. But all of you want to actually take something, one takeaway from a conference, right? And you want to go and implement that takeaway. And what I would say to you is that one of the takeaways that you can take home right now as soon as you get home, especially if you've got children, boys and girls, is start changing your behaviour towards them. And start thinking, am I actually, really, it's an unconscious bias, I don't mean to do it, but am I telling my daughter to be more safe than my son? How am I behaving towards them? You also in this room, I often come to conferences and people say, but how can I make a difference in the world? Well, frankly, you know, in this room alone, you have the ability to change hundreds of thousands of lives on Monday morning because of where you work. So it's really interesting thinking about culture, thinking about diversity, but also thinking, okay, if we're worried about the fact that we can't recruit that many female data scientists or data engineers or network managers, rather than trying to stick band-aids onto the problem, actually try and think about the root of the cause. So I just wanted to respond to that because I'm incredibly passionate about it, but I'm just as much of a feminist as the gentleman over there who's got 50-50 gender ratios in his organisation. I'm Priya. I'm the founder and CEO of Century. I was one of those kids that used to sell chomp bars at school for 10 pence and make a profit of about 2 pence. And then once I realised that that was a really, really good gig, I then scaled to Curly Whirlies because you could sell those for 17 pence and make a profit of 6 pence. But I actually didn't make as much money as everyone thought because I used to eat a lot of the chocolate bars by myself and I used to give a lot of them away. I went to a grammar school and I was also surrounded by children who actually didn't have 10p or 17 pence. And I used to give those kids my chocolate bars. And actually that's when I learned at quite a young age that I had a heart. I was willing to give things away to people who needed it. I also spent all of my long summers and long winter holidays when I was a child in Africa, in Kenya. So I'm East African Indian, and we used to go and visit our family there. And when I was in Africa, it's really interesting because I was a complete tomboy as a kid. And if you know what tomboys are like, we don't like wearing dresses, we like wearing jeans and a hoodie. It's probably because I had an older brother. But I was basically put in a white dress with pink polka dots by my mum. And you can just only imagine how mortified I was wearing this dress. But we went out to a slum area, and my brother and I were playing football with some kids. And these kids didn't have shoes on, and a couple of them didn't have pants on. And I remember playing football with them, having a nice time. And one of the worst moments of my life, ready for the website, one of the worst moments of my life was when this white Mercedes drives up to the side of this sort of slum park. It's just gravel and sort of sand and dirt. And it's Jeroge, our family driver, who's come to collect me and my brother. And I felt horrible. And I was only 6, and I thought, this is so unfair. I'm wearing a white polka dot dress. I've got a white Mercedes coming to collect me with our driver called Jeroge. And these kids don't know if they're going to get clean water today. And at that age, I decided, I'm going to change the world. And I was 6, and that was ambitious. But what was really interesting about that is that I can tell you, this is my favorite website. I don't know what yours are, Amazon, Google. I go on this quite a lot. I'll show it to you. It's the current world population. It shows you births and it shows you deaths by the second. And what I figured out was out of the 7.5 billion people on this planet, I'm the luckiest. Because at 6 years old, I found my purpose. I knew what I wanted to do. How many of us know our purpose? What's even more fascinating is that out of 6.5 billion people in this world, 5 billion people are of working age. And of the 5 billion of working age, 3 billion want jobs. And of the 3 billion people on this planet that want jobs, 1.3 billion have jobs. And of the 1.3 billion that have jobs, only 13%, so not 87%, 13% of those 1.3 billion are engaged in what they do. And what's really fascinating about that is that there are going to be several people here who are not particularly passionate or moved or engaged with what they're doing every day. And we talk about productivity in the world, but this is one of the reasons. And we know that people who are driven by purpose, people who are engaged in what they do, are driven, and they're one of the 13%. So I ask you, and you don't need to shout out an answer, but are you one of the 13% or are you one of the 87? And every time I go and speak to educators, it's really interesting, but we're a special breed of people because we're actually in one of the most important sectors in the world. And we don't need a worldwide purpose, I'm going to go change the world. But actually, to have purpose in what you do, it's about having a little goal. It could be a big goal, it could be a little goal. It could be baby steps. But having that goal every day in terms of what you want to achieve, for example, I want to achieve 50-50 diversity in my organisation. I want more females. I'm going to go and find somebody to be in my group and offer them that initial role of customer service, but then I'm going to offer them training and let them shadow everyone. That gives you a sense of drive and a sense of purpose. And so what are you going to do on Monday morning to ensure that you are one of the 13% and you're not one of the 87%? Now, it's a little bit bizarre because I was 6 years old, right? And so I figured out how to this change the world sort of moment. And then I decided that I would become a barrister and fight the baddies in court. So I went to school, I carried on at school, I worked hard, and I said to my school, I'm going to sign my UCAS form, right? I want to do my UCAS form and my personal statement. I'm going to be a barrister. And Mrs. Gilpin at Altrincham Girls Grammar said, Priya, you are never going to be a barrister because you are Indian, you are female, you're certainly not going to Oxbridge, you're not bright enough, and you will never make it. So I went home and I told my dad, now just put your hand up, have you got any experience of dealing with Asian kids or Asian parents in your organisations? There's quite a few of you, you know what they're like, right? My dad said, what? This is nonsense. You have to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. Okay? So he races into Altrincham Girls Grammar School, sixth form. Mrs. Gilpin, if you don't sign Priya's UCAS form, I'm going to sue you for loss of future revenue and earnings. And Mrs. Gilpin sort of sat there thinking, oh dear, right? she still said, Mr. Lakhani, I'm sorry, but Priya's never going to be a barrister. Female, ethnic minority, simply not bright enough, not going to Oxbridge, stats don't stack up, she's not going to make it. It's an embarrassment to our school if I sign that UCAS form. A week later, my dad, this is probably why I am who I am, just perseveres, goes in and says, that's it, Mrs. Gilpin, I'm going to call Anne Robinson and I'm going to call Watchdog. And this has become a watchdog issue. My daughter must become a barrister. And so eventually she relented, she signed the UCAS form. And I actually got into university. I did pretty well at school in the end. I was just all about just get the grade, make it happen, get to the next step. And I practiced as a barrister and I absolutely loved my job. I loved what I did. I had a 100% success rate at interviews. I was doing what I wanted. In-house counsel for the press, sort of all about democracy, freedom of speech, but also ensuring that when the press went out, I wanted it to be more positive. I didn't want them to write scandalous stories without any basis. I wanted to change that. But I just didn't feel like I was changing the world enough. I was sponsoring kids in Africa, I was doing laps around ice rinks to raise money for charity, and it just wasn't quite enough. So then I did one highly irrational thing. And in August 2008, I quit my job as a barrister after practicing for about 4.5 years. So I was earning, good money for someone in my mid-20s. And I set up a curry sauce company. And everyone thought, you're mad. You're never going to get into Tesco, Waitrose, Ocado. Again, it was no, I can't. And it was really interesting because I said, look, I'm going to give it a go. There's a gap in the market. We all buy fresh pasta sauces. Where are the fresh ethnic sauces? I'm working late nights as a lawyer. There's a gap in the market. I'm going to give it a go. And if I can get into a supermarket by Christmas, we're good. And if I can't, I'll quit. And what was really interesting is within 6 weeks of starting the company, I had nationwide deals with Waitrose, Ocado, 3,000 Delicatessens, Harvey Nicks, Harrods, and we were also having export deals, conversations with the USA and with the Middle East. I set up Masala, but what was really, really different about it was I wanted to change the world. So for every pot of sauce that I sold, I fed a homeless person a hot meal in India. I started funding schools in India, in the slums, and providing vaccines through the Gavi Alliance in Africa. This got on the radar of government because there was this kind of nutty woman somewhere in her late 20s now in London running around with a hoodie, in a tracksuit rather than a three-piece suit as a lawyer, and feeding lots of people working with the United Nations in Gavi Alliance. And I was invited on Vince Cable's advisory board. And when I was on his advisory board, when he was Secretary of State for Business Innovation and Skills, he was obviously very, very concerned about the skills side of things, because obviously if we're not equipping our children with the right skills, what are they then going on to do, and how is that affecting the economy? And I came across a mortifying fact. 1.8 million children are underperforming in UK schools. The dropout rate and retention rate at universities is stressing out our skills minister and becoming alarming in the sense that it's not something that we actually know how to control very well. And here I am building schools in the slums in India and funding them in Africa and thinking, what's our education system like in the UK? So I went out and thought, let me go and ask some questions. I went to schools, further education colleges, higher education institutions, and started asking people on the front line what's going on. And there I learned of the 3 big pain points in the education system. The one-size-fits-all delivery of education is inadequate, we know that. We leave students struggling behind, we leave some under challenge, we're not engaging them as much. We're doing exactly what I'm actually doing to you right now, but we're not able to make those targeted interventions. We also learned about data management and workload and how actually teachers can often be overstretched, whether they're in primary school all the way to in higher education. A teacher came to teach. They came to impart knowledge of a subject they're passionate about or work with young people. We know that. Are they actually able to do that day in, day out? And actually, the profession is being stretched because they need to have that data to be able to figure out, is a student going to drop out? Can't we retain that student? What's going on? What's the point of intervention? And how do we understand that? Where are we collecting the real-time data? And the third was just dropout. How many students drop out throughout higher education and further education in colleges? And how do we solve that problem? So I became really, really passionate about this. I had 2 children along the way in my sort of entrepreneurial journey and thought, I'm interested in education, how do we solve this problem? What technology are we using? And I went in, again, from primary all the way to higher education. and found that in the actual classroom on the front line, we've mostly just moved from a blackboard to a whiteboard. Whereas all of us engage with artificial intelligence every single day when we're searching on Google, shopping on Amazon, finding a place to stay on Airbnb. Where is that in education? And I was really, really interested in, could I go back to my slides? Really interested in how we could basically solve that problem. So I searched and searched. There was no company that was doing something really on the front line in the classroom that was using real artificial intelligence. And that's really important to say because we need to figure out how to increase outcomes, motivate students, engage them, identify gaps in learning, but most importantly with AI and big data, predict behaviours, predict engagement, identify at-risk students, and allocate resources efficiently. We need to use machine learning, big data analysis, and neuroscience, but those terms are being thrown around everywhere. And actually, when I started digging deeper, I found out those companies weren't really using AI. They were using rule-based systems, and there was actually no machine learning at play. Because if you want to have machine learning, you need to first of all have a big database. And if you have a big database, you need to have enough data in it to actually be able to instigate machine learning. And then I realized I have to explain to even technologists what artificial intelligence really is. And bear with me a second, humor me, I just want to go through it just to ensure that we're all on the same page. Because I started speaking to people actually in the IT departments, and it's really interesting because some of them were talking about robots saying I love you and falling in love with you. I thought, no, AI is actually pretty simple. How do we learn as humans? How do we become better at what we do? We learn from experience. What does a machine do? Input, output. It just follows instructions. And the big question is, can a machine learn from experience? And what we've all decided through data and science from the 80s when Geoff Hinton was looking into backpropagation and neural networks was, can a machine actually just learn from data? And machines can learn from data, and therefore it's like a machine learning from experience. I also felt the need to produce the No BS Guide to AI, co-written with UCL, with Professor Rose Luckin. And if you don't know who Rose Luckin is and you're interested in artificial intelligence and you're working in a university, you need to connect with her. Because I was getting really, really sick and tired about people throwing around these terms and actually not understanding what they meant. But where was this technology? It wasn't there. And so we started looking into it and doing some research. I did the Stanford AI course, the neural networks course. Interestingly, I did lots of MOOC courses, and MOOCs have been what's known as the biggest fad of EdTech for the last 10 years, although many would say actually incredibly useful in terms of upskilling students and providing really a great segue for those potentially your enemy, but the Udacities and the Coursera's and the edX. How do we actually allow universities to use those models to scale themselves? But we don't want 96% dropout rates, which those courses often have. Well, rather than just build learning management systems and actually having a bog standard sort of YouTube type delivery, wouldn't it be great if we built a machine that learned how every single one of your brains learned? Because if I could learn how Heidi's brain learned, I would know your effort levels, your focus levels, your resilience, your memory function. I track every mouse movement on a screen on our platform. I'd be able to, with enough data, predict how you're going to behave just after spending about 20 odd minutes on the platform. And what's really alarming about this is that that technology exists today. It's actually not rocket science. It's how we use artificial intelligence and big data in fintech. It's how we can predict what stocks to buy. It's how we can use it in marketing and advertising technology, mad tech. So I went to the government with a piece of paper. It had 2 pages either side. I was with Vince Cable, Secretary of State for Business, Matthew Hancock, who's now Secretary of State for DCMS, and Lord Young, and I even spoke to David Cameron, who was then PM. And I said, we need to build a machine that learns how every brain learns. And we're going to use AI and big data. We're going to combine it with neuroscience. My answer to the question on neurodiversity is we all have special needs. You've just got to figure out how special you are, how your brain works. And if we can figure out how every single brain works, we then leverage the brain just like a tool and we ensure that we provide material and education to every child, every student in the way that they actually need it. What's education for was part of my paper. Why are we bothering? Because we want to give every student the skills and the knowledge that they need to go and seize opportunities. And actually the future of education depends really on what the future of jobs is. And we don't really know what that is either, because in about 20 to 30 years, what jobs are they going to be? I mean, I say to my 5 and 7-year-old now, sweethearts, either learn how to build the robot or do the thing that the robot can't do. That's all you need to think about. But what is education, and what are we actually trying to achieve in our institutions? And we have to think about that, because obviously we have ministers in government. We had Michael Gove, we've still got Nick Gibb, who are all about rote learning. Those children from school feed up into your institutions in terms of how they learn. Actually, we need our students to be able to adapt, to be able to use resources, to be able to find the answers, to be able to think for themselves, and to be able to change and be able to upskill themselves very, very quickly. So can we build a machine that learns how your brain learns, adapts, predicts behavior, intervenes by itself, provides all the data in real time for the educator, so the educator no longer needs to micro-assess, micro-mark, track knowledge, track skills, try and show any sort of regulator that they're doing that. And it was really interesting because my response from senior cabinet ministers was, oh, that's great, we'll go through procurement. And I thought, oh my goodness. If there's anything I've known for basically advising the Secretary of State so far for 3 years at this point, is we don't want to go through procurement. And I said, frankly, no disrespect to them, but you're going to go to the likes of IBM or Pearson, 15 years later, £500 million of taxpayers' money later, end up with absolutely nothing. So in the corner of Victoria Street, Vince turned around to me and said, why don't you build it? And what was really interesting, because this talk is also partly about challenging the status quo, because that's what you're all here to do from Monday morning, is I said, okay, I will try and build this machine. And actually, what was really fascinating about that is you can imagine what I was met with when I went out. I actually decided to stop my food company. I actually decided that I would build an education system. Because with the food company, at this moment, as you can imagine, as entrepreneurs all have these stories. I was at dinner with my husband at Zaza, some Italian restaurant in Middlesex near my parents' house. And I said, sweetheart, I think I'm going to run an artificial intelligence company. And he sort of looked at me and said, okay. And then we got a napkin out, and we had a line down the middle, and we had Company X, Company Y. Company X was Masala Masala, the food company, but I couldn't call it that, because the minute I saw the name, I just felt so attached to it. It was my baby, right? I built that company. It was profit-making from year one. I was building schools and giving all the money away. It was great. But that one said, after the financial forecast, it said, sell curry sauces, feed the homeless. And the other one just said, education. And I had goosebumps, and I thought, I can't not do this. So you can imagine what I was met with. I went to investors, I spoke to people, and they said, are you a former Google engineer? And I said, no. And they said, can you code? And I said, no. They said, how on earth are you going to build an AI company? And I thought, I don't know. I'll just figure it out. I need to find some techies. I need to hire them. I pretty much know what the machine's got to do, but we'll figure it out. And of course, we had, on International Women's Day, I had to speak about this a little bit yesterday. I did have the odd investor, spend about 6 meetings with me, and then later, oh, I've got a room upstairs in the hotel. You have all those sorts of problems as a female entrepreneur that you have to deal with, and it's a complete and utter waste of my time, and I absolutely hate it. But what I would say is that I went out to go and raise £150,000. I raised £540,000 within 2 weeks, and we built a beta. We then raised another 1.5 million, and then another 1.5 million, and we're doing a Series A, and we built a platform that learns how your brain learns. And this is essentially what it does.
How can you improve learning outcomes while reducing teacher workload at the same time? By using artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms personalize learning by analyzing large quantities of data from learners around the world. When Emily first logs in, Century uses diagnostic assessments to identify gaps in her knowledge and prepares a personalized path through the curriculum. It recommends topics to study from a range of subjects in the content library, offering personalized educational media based on her preferences and performance. At the end of each topic, Emily is assessed via a combination of exact answer and multiple choice questions and receives instant feedback on her performance. Century Auto marks the students' work and records their scores. So, when a teacher, parent or guardian logs in, they can view real-time data in an easy-to-interpret format, including strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, skills, and question-level data. So Emily's teacher, Mr. Gilmore, knows exactly where Emily is succeeding and where she is struggling. Based on Emily's performance, Century now calculates a new optimal learning path, all the time adapting to her needs and identifying any areas where teacher intervention is required. Helping students and teachers worldwide to improve outcomes. This is Century. Century was built by teachers, for teachers. Let's fall in love with teaching again.
So, what was really interesting about the platform though, and that took actually an extra year in terms of development, was to build a content agnostic system. So to build an entire content management system that could host any course, any author, any curriculum, any age group. And so actually the system is subsidized for education because we have IBM, we have Cisco, we have companies teaching their employees their learning and development skills and knowledge base, their upgrades and systems, for example, on this technology. Century doesn't need to be a brand, it doesn't need to be a hero anywhere and say we're the technology. It just needs to be the underlying technology underpinning any system. And what we really focused on was how can we help education today? I think what all of us would love to do in education is start from a blank sheet of paper and say what should it look like? But obviously to solve problems, you have to think, given what I have today, how do I solve the problems? And that's a really interesting question because often I host BET every year. And what I do say to people, and what I find, is that they go and find shiny new tech, they find shiny new systems, and then they retrofit it to their institution and to their problems. And we always think, don't do that. What are the problems that you're facing today? Fix them and find the technology that will help to fix those problems. So this system, from the age of 7 years old, all the way to, got 65-year-olds on it, can learn how you learn, track everything, and then provide the data to the individual. Every nanosecond a student is on it, from primary years all the way to an IBM employee in the USA. It's affecting the algorithms and affecting the system. Every message that you saw on the system is algorithmic and personalized, all founded in neuroscience, so growth mindset messaging, Carol Dweck's work at Stanford University. But it's all about how can we change outcomes for the learner, how can we improve engagement, how can we increase retention, and how can we actually see correlations between a lack of engagement and potentially a student who's at risk of dropping out. But how do you do that when you're an educational institution? How do you bring in technology, whether it's new systems, whether it's new architecture focused on security, or whether it's something that's on the front line, and how do you make those changes? Because the one thing that we know is no matter how much we might be aware of core technology, we've just launched our blockchain application called Story 2 days ago, where actually the digital CV of every student is stored on an application, and that transaction is stored on the blockchain. But how do you bring that into an institution? And that's to do with culture. Because actually some of the most innovative and forward-thinking people that I meet in institutions are the people who work in the IT room or the data managers. Because they know technology, they understand it and they know what it can do. But how do you filter that down an organisation? Because if you can't do that, it looks like it was a failure. And that's all about culture. Because education, as we know, is not the most forward-thinking sector when it comes to implementing innovation and innovative techniques in terms of, and especially technology. You might have heard this quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So strategy is fantastic, right? Because at C-level, we can sit down, we all do this, we identify our strategy, and strategy gives us logic. It gives us a formal logic to be able to decide what our goals are for the business and how we're going to solve particular problems in the business. And that's great. But culture are the values and the belief systems of everybody in the organisation, not just the C-levels, that guide those people towards actually achieving those goals. And we know that we lead culture from the top. But what I would say, and I say this all the time, is that a strong culture misaligned with strategy can be your biggest liability. Because in education, there is a huge culture of sort of being risk averse with adopting new technologies. And culture is a silent language. It's dangerous because you can't actually see it. You sort of feel it. It's shared amongst all the people in your institution, and your institutions are large. It's enduring, it lasts. But what's really interesting is that it should be evolving. We all change strategy, right? We change our strategy every so often. At Century, being an agile technology company and being a new company, going from startup to scale up, we've had to change our strategy. Are we focused on the tech? Are we only focused on the tech? Now we're focused on traction, getting into the market. It's a completely different strategy. But every time you change strategy in your business, and that can be you want to be innovative, you want to bring in innovative tools and products to solve certain problems, you need to have a look at the culture in your organisation and figure out how you're going to solve it. Because you've all been there, you've tried to introduce something new and it hasn't quite filtered down through the organisation and people can reject it. And that happens in education all the time. And actually, this is a really, really interesting graph. It's from Harvard Business Review, if you want to find it. And it tells you the different types of culture. Got cultures led by purpose. Most startup, scale-up tech companies will be driven by a big sense of purpose, like Century, want to change the world, want to improve outcomes, remove the one-size-fits-all, reduce workload for educators, reduce dropout, and increase opportunity for every student. There are cultures based on learning. Tesla state that their culture is all around learning. It's about innovation, learning about new ideas and new things. And there's enjoyment. Disney say our culture is all about enjoyment. It's about our staff as well as our customers enjoying themselves while they interact with this organisation and our values. If you're going to place your educational institution, your organisation in any of these areas, what's really interesting is that when they reviewed education and culture, education was over here. It was about authority, this is just the way that we're going to do things, about bold leadership, but not really anyone collaborating or being innovative, and safety, we know what works. But do you? Because actually in education, the UK is well known as having a fantastic education at higher level. School level, I don't think we can even really get into the top 20 in the PISA rankings anymore, if that's what you're interested in. I mean, I would argue, I'm not sure PISA tables are what we should be interested in education. But actually, we don't know if we're going to be able to hold that position for so long. Because we do know, in the last decade, that any organisation, whether it's an NGO or a tech company, that focuses on learning and purpose and hiring the best talent through having some form of enjoyment, when they're scaling results, because you want your results, you want revenue, they're the ones that have broken boundaries, they've been disruptive, they've been rebellious, and actually they're the ones that attract the customer. And even as universities, even as schools, your customer is the student. And what you'll find is that your organisations will often be in this area, but the techies and the people who go around and they understand the world, they see what the world's doing with technology, you play with all the gadgets, right? You're kind of up there. And unless you can align those strategies, you find it very, very difficult. And what's the one best way to align those strategies? For any of you that have read Crossing the Chasm, introducing anything new and innovative in an institution, you have your innovators and your pioneers, then it sort of filters out into your early adopters, then you sort of get the mass general, the general public who will come along, and then you've got the laggards at the end who you don't even bother trying to basically, change in terms of their values and their attitudes. So you can try and go down that curve if you like and find pioneers and ambassadors in your institutions to champion any sort of products and services that you bring into the institution to make it more efficient, to try and drive revenue upwards, to try and increase retention, whatever those problems are that you're trying to address. But the quickest way, the quickest tried and tested way to bridge you and the way that you think with an institution where culture can often be about safety and authority is actually to find somebody who's in between. And that's why this graph is so useful. Somebody who is interested in order culturally. When you interview them, they like order. Someone who's interested in results, but also someone who has some sense of learning and purpose. And these people exist. When you interview them, what are your values? What do you care about? What do you bring to an institution? And companies have often found, these are large organizations, large corporates that can't innovate effectively. The way they've started to innovate is they've started to hire people in the middle ground who bridge the two. So I guess the question for you today is, whatever you've taken out of the conference, and even if it's that, you know, you've got young children or you've got grandchildren or you've got nieces and nephews and you're going to let the daughter, the girl, climb the fire pole. But you've got to think, what am I going to do on Monday? And how am I going to achieve it? How am I going to change the culture in my institution to ensure that I can bring this in, but I can actually get adoption? Because you bring any tech that you like, security, network systems may be simpler, possibly, because you're just going to drive that in anyway. But how are you actually going to change the way your university or your institution operates? What are you going to do? What's your takeaway? And how are you going to communicate that to people? And actually, I had a sort of a final note on training that I'll just quickly dip into. Continuing professional development, we've got stats that all universities, all schools, all further education colleges drop budgets from CPD when they have financial pressure. And you have to start to think to yourself, well, is that something that we want to do? Because actually, it's the training of people within the organisation that matter in terms of adoption. For us, when we train people on new technology, we offer them continuing professional development. We go into our institutions. We get from the data who the ambassadors are, and then we give that analytics to the leadership team, and we have those people pitch the product, pitch the technology to the rest of the institution. The one thing I know, for example, when we're dealing with lecturers, we've got 2 universities that we deal with, is that the lecturers and teachers believe lecturers and teachers. They don't believe anybody else. So if you're looking at products and services at that sort of frontline level, then you need to get the pioneers in front of everybody else in terms of adoption. But I think the last note that I'd leave you on, because of the question that was asked, that was obviously controversial and obviously raised, lots of other questions, and I know that they couldn't deal with them, was think about your workforce, think about your team. We can go on about artificial intelligence, we can go on about blockchain, we can think about the future of education and the future of skills. But half the population are women. And so if you're not thinking about how to involve them in your teams, then actually it's your team culture, but it's your team results that miss out. McKinsey say, right, that if we achieve gender parity, we'll increase our worldwide GDP by $12 trillion. In the UK alone, by 2030, we'll have 850,000 more people in the workforce if we actually treated women the same and actually paid them the same. And I was just saying earlier that I have a CTO. He's a German man called Kevin. He's absolutely brilliant. He's the world speaker for Scala and Strata World. He's an AI expert. And Kevin says, Priya, I really, really want a diverse team. I want to make sure that my team is diverse. And Century is a very, very diverse place to work. I mean, we go to talent first, controversial statement, I'll just say it as it is. I'm a chief exec. I want the hottest talent in Europe, if not the world, working in Century. I go for that as number one. And also I want to ensure that we have a diverse workplace. We also implement what I call the no arsehole rule from day one, and you get it on your contract. If you behave like an arse, you can't work at Century. Why? Because actually talented data scientists, data engineers, neuroscientists and teachers, that's the entire workforce at Century, don't want to work in a place where they're not engaged. I want you to be part of the 13% if you're at Century, not the 87%. Because if you're part of the 13%, we actually have a fighting chance of changing the world and being productive enough to do that. And so I run it from the top. I've only ever asked 5 people to leave Century. We're at the beginning, and that definitely sent the message through that Priya means business when she says, don't be an arse. But at the same time, we've had 4 people leave, but they've all gone to move country. Our retention is really, really high for an advanced deep learning tech company in London. But you've got to think about your workforce. And for those of you interested in AI, you can touch on the issue that we talk about gender bias and we talk about bias in AI. In artificial intelligence, we need more women because they're building the products and services that our children are using today and are going to be using. And what we can't have is that all of those coders are men. Because obviously you build in the bias into the systems when and it sounds like people say, well, there are algorithms and machine learns faster. Well, yes, but who weights those data models? Who puts the weights into the data models? Who's thinking about that? So think, Monday morning, the best use of a conference is definitely to have fun until 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning from Thursday night at the Hilton, which was great to see because that's a sign of a really good conference because most of the magic happens when you're all actually speaking to each other. But what is your takeaway? What are you going to do? What are you going to implement? How are you going to implement it? Because buying tech for tech's sake, upgrading systems for tech's sake doesn't work. You've got to use it in a way that is incredibly powerful for your organization, solves problems, and if you haven't got problems, then absolutely it's about innovating. But thank you very, very much for listening to me. I very, very much appreciate you. I'm between you and going home. I think Heidi would like to ask if there are any questions.
Any questions? Nope.
No,
Well,
thank you. Oh, we've got a question. Thank you.
Oh, there is a question. There is a
Hi.
question. You have a question.
So you're clearly very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
What's next on your radar?
So next on my radar, I get asked that quite a lot. Really interesting. So a journalist asked me yesterday, how long have you been interested in technology? And she was expecting a really quick answer, and I said, well, I'm a consumer of technology. I understand AI. I've been interested, not that interested actually for that long. I'm interested in disruption. I'm interested in anything that makes things better. But what's next for me is I don't think I'm going to be done for several years. The reason I say that is that this is the one sector, second largest sector in the world, but arguably the most important. You're all working in it. It's the most backward sector in the world. So I think that for Century to make a... So we have had the UAE knocking on our door. We've had higher education institutions knocking on our door. We've had independent schools knocking on our door. But for me to get this type of AI system into academies, into academy chains, into free schools, I think it's going to take me quite a lot of time, just because I don't think the sector is as open to technology as they could be. So let's see. But I mean, if I ever do solve this problem, then it will definitely be healthcare next. I certainly won't stop.
Small problem to solve.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, can
Thank
we
you very
Priya
much.
again?
Thank you.